listening to Coffee and Conversation with Recovery Advocate Network, the nonprofit organization that strives to address the staggering disparity in resource availability for individuals suffering from mental health disorders, processing disorders, addictions, trauma healing, and sexual identity challenges. Together, we strive to end the stigma associated with these challenges so that true healing can begin. Welcome back to Coffee and Conversation with Recovery Advocate Network. I'm your host, Ange, and welcome you to episode number 15. Today, we welcome Sandra Rostirolla, author of Making Friends with Monsters. Sandra joins us as the second edition of the Recovery Advocate Network Book Club series. She has generously donated an autographed copy of her book for sale at our auction scheduled for October 26th through the 28th, 2023. All book club editions include the author, as well as the podcast host signature, and 100% of the money raised goes to support the mission. Email donate@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org for more information. Sandra's books have received many accolades, including SEBA's Dante Rossetti Award for Best Young Adult Fiction, the Author Academy Award for Best Middle Grade Young Adult, and Literacy Classics Best Adventure. She was born in Sydney, Australia, and currently lives in Los Angeles with her husband and her rescue kitten, Noodle. If you're nearby and want to meet her, she has an event at the Orange County Book Fair on October 1st. I will include the information in the show notes. Now back to her book. Making Friends with Monsters tells the story of 12-year-old Sam as he learns to deal with many mental health and family challenges such as suicide, addiction, abuse, self-harm, financial hardship, and more. I loved this book so much, I've recommended it to moms groups as a book club to read to help them learn new language to use with their children around emotions and mental health, therapists, treatment centers, and I even took a stab at submitting it to Oprah to see if there was a shot of getting it into her book club. It's that impactful. So, what are we waiting for? Fill up your coffee and let's get started. Good evening, listeners. We are actually recording this on a Monday evening. I'm very excited to have Sandra. We were practicing her last name just a minute ago because I think it's really important that names are unique to an individual. And I always want to be able to master someone's name, and my tongue just does not roll correctly. But it's Sandra Rostirolla. Say it correctly.
I told Angela that in Australia, I grew up in Australia, it's Rostirolla. However, I'm half Italian, so otherwise it would be Rostirolla.
Which sounds amazing.
There you go.
So Sandra is the author of the book, Making Friends with Monsters. And the tidbit that I was going to tell you, Sandra, that I'll share now is that this will be the second book in our book club series. And when I got the book in the mail, I insist on I read every single book that's in our book club series, every single one before I interview the author. And I got in the mail and I thought, I do not want to read a teenage novel. Like, why? How did this happen? And that was my initial reaction. And I am so glad that first off, I was completely off base. It was amazing. I think I told you in an email that I cried on page 277. So at some point later in our conversation, we'll talk about why I cried on page 277. Audience, you can buy the book and find out for sure what's on that page when you get to it. So I want to, if you're okay with it, maybe kick us off by reading why you wrote the story.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So here is the introduction to the book, and then we'll dig in and Sandra can tell us in her own words why she's here today. So why she wrote the story. My father died by suicide when I was 13. Because my family never spoke about the issues leading up to and resulting from this devastating event, we suffered a great deal. My goal is to give children and parents a language they can understand, where they feel comfortable talking about subjects and emotions that all too often get buried. Growing up amidst dysfunction, it is difficult to ascertain one's sense of normal. What might seem like a realistic topic of discussion to me might come across as quite shocking to others. Because I knew my normalcy pendulum had swung well beyond its equilibrium point, part of my journey included input from young readers and parents to make sure I had balanced my thematic material appropriately for my target audience. Here is what they said, which I related to several of these. This book could help save a life. Absolutely. This book was so good I couldn't put it down. Agreed. After every plot twist, I gasp out loud, which you really hid quite a few of the plot twists really well. Really well. This book is one of my favorite books I've ever read. This book has so many issues we experience in daily life, and you've hit the nail on the head with all of them. And the final quote was, I just loved this book. It literally made me laugh and cry. True story. So Sandra is offering this author statement because she wants readers to be aware of possible triggering content, which is why I wanted to kick us off as well, as we do announce trigger warnings in this episode. While telling this story through the lens of an innocent, wildly imaginative 12-year-old helps to soften the impact of some of my challenging topics, when dealing with mental health, suicide, and family dysfunction, there is only so much softening one can do before the story begins to feel disingenuous. So Sandra, why don't you share with us why you're here today?
The main reason why I wrote the book, I hadn't planned on it. Authors have this constant, what's my next story? What am I going to write? Like, we're always chasing the story. And this is an absolute case of the story finding me. I had not planned to write it. I was in the middle of my YA fantasy series. I'd had book 1 finished of the Cecilia series. So it's called Cecilia, The Last Correlateer. And I was back in Australia doing a book launch. I live in Los Angeles. And one of my school friends told me just a really devastating story about a couple of years prior, her ex had died by suicide. And she was left with 3 daughters, ranging from ages 11 to 20. And I just looked at my friend and honestly, I just felt it in my heart. And I'm like, you're my mum. Because mum lost her husband, my dad, when I was 13, and she had 5 kids, ranging from 13 to 19. And Anthony said to me, she said, I can cope with all of it. I can cope with just the tragedy of it all and everything that had to be done. She said, but the one thing that breaks me every single time is when my girls say to me, Mummy, why did Daddy do it? And she said, because I just don't know what to say. And I went, wow, gosh, if anyone knows what to say, it needs to be me. I just felt compelled. I felt like I had to write this story. And so I had a 14-hour flight from Sydney back to Los Angeles, and I just couldn't stop thinking about this story. I couldn't. I'm like, I have to write this story. And so I did. I actually wrote Making Friends with Monsters, put it on the back burner because it was there. I had to get it out. The pandemic hit, and then I kicked out book 2 and book 3 of the Cecilia series, got back to Monsters and released it April of this year. I think another thing that had happened, 13 Reasons Why had come out, and I'm not sure, are you familiar with that?
Yes.
And I didn't read the book, disclaimer, but I did watch the series, and that targeted an older teenage group, 15, 16-year-olds. They were sort of getting into sort of more, shall I say, naughtier things. And I just wanted to go back a step further. I wanted to go back to a slightly younger group, which I call my upper MG, lower YA. So, your 12 to 14-year-olds. And I sort of wanted to get them before they became these troubled 15, 16-year-olds that are dealing with these heavier issues at school. Hence why I chose the lens of the 12-year-old Sam. I probably subconsciously also did that. Sam is worried about his older brother, Ben, who's 17. So there's like a 5-year age difference between them. Just so happened that when I was around 12, my best friend was my older brother, John, who was 17. And he sort of did a similar thing where he did a 180 on our family and on me, and he just became this different guy. And I remember how devastating it was for me to have my brother do that. And so I think that's another reason why I sort of chose this dynamic of this little 12-year-old boy just really worried about his older brother. People have asked me, you're a female. Why did you choose Sam to be a boy and not a girl? And I'm not sure I have a specific reason other than it just felt right. And I think because in my family I've had multiple deaths by suicide, I've had my father and two brothers, I just have a tender spot for boys. I know they have a tougher time with their emotions. And while I want this to be relatable for everyone, you clearly have to choose male or female. I thought, you know what, this is a love letter to the men in my life and to any other young boy that is struggling with their emotions.
I can see that. In fact, I was thinking that the first quote that I wrote down when I was reading it is on page 4, where Sam says, I hug my mom all the time. Hugs don't seem to be a dad thing.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so true, right? How much in reading the story, how much it appeared that he was so concerned, of course, what's happening with my dad, but it was so much of those emotions blocked off in that story, which you're kind of relating in this period. That is very intuitive in that part. So I'm curious then, because after I read it at the end, I just, first off, is absolutely amazed. One of the things that's really amazing about this book is that you have interwoven into it so many different life challenges: addiction, self-harm, suicide, grief, guilt, shame, tragedy, disability, the impact and the embarrassment of disability. I mean, everything I can even think of as being a challenge, you've somehow woven into this story of this family and the individuals around it, financial hardship, all of this. And yet, do you have a degree in psychology? Like, how are you able on a 14-hour flight to be able to sit and say, let me try and think of every potential hardship an individual could have in their mental health and weave it into one story of one family, and done really, really, really well. Like, not at any point did I think this piece was forced into it. It was suddenly, for example, I mentioned on page 277 when I cried on that page because I was not expecting to see that challenge pop up then. I mean, it was 2 sentences before. I knew what was going to happen only 2 sentences before. It just occurred to me because I've struggled with that in my life. And I've worked with so many different individuals. And on this podcast, we've talked to different individuals who struggled with that. Now you got to pull up what's on 277.
I actually pulled up page 277. Are we going to be giving...
I kind of
what is it, 227? Is that what you said?
No, it's 277. And maybe I'll give a teaser because one of the things I really like about it, it's Becky's monster.
Oh, right.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
But I will say one thing the thing that I highlighted on page 277 is one day my monster discovered a way to make everything stop, which I think is a recurring theme in mental health and a lot of the challenges is a coping mechanism. And we talk a lot about this on this podcast in episode 13, the link between childhood trauma and addiction, how we learn certain skills at certain ages that seem like a good idea at that point as coping mechanisms. And later in life, we realize, oh, well, eating disorders, not good coping mechanisms. Self-harm, not. Addictions, not. All of these things that seem to work and then become challenges. So I like where it said, one day my monster discovered a way to make everything stop. And it's like a hidden thing that doesn't really make the pain stop, but it temporarily feels as if that's the case.
Exactly. Well, getting back to your question, do I have a degree in psychology? No, but I have a degree in life, in a dysfunctional family. Things don't just happen in ones. They just don't. They don't. If you've got someone that is that depressed, like a parental figure that's that depressed, it's going to bleed down to us kids subconsciously and spur off with other things. people dabbling with drugs. I was cutting myself. I was doing that. All the things that happened in Sam's family, we had financial struggles. Granted, we were lucky. We did live in Australia. Australia is a socialized country, so certainly I don't think that our struggles were nearly as bad as what I see in America, but then everything's relative. It's relative to your situation. And, I knew we were poor. We lived in a very, very small house. So, yeah, everything that happened to Sam, I've lived. Now, of course, as an author, it is our job, I would say. I mean, we're creating compelling matter for people to read. So you do want to amp things up. So, of course, I took the liberty and threw Sam in the worst, and his family in the worst situation possible at the end of the millennium drought, when on a farm where all their sheep were dying because of the drought. But again, a lot of that was based in reality. I did a lot of research. at that time. And so again, everything that happened to Sam's family has happened to multiple farmers. There's not one thing, I don't even know whether this is a spoiler alert, but Dot Cobble and her little, what do we want to say about that? I'll let you say her little answer to problems, answer to problems. Completely true. There is a company called Exit International that set up a situation where the elderly and infirmed could go off to this farm in New South Wales, Australia, and brew up what they needed. When I was doing the research on all this, it's that bad that I started to come across these warnings saying, warning, it is illegal. It is illegal to possess the recipe for this. And I started to get, it's like your IP will be, what do they call it? Well, your IP will be
revoked
traced and everything. So I started to freak out. I'm like, I don't actually want it. I just want to make sure I'm being as legitimate as possible about everything that I'm saying. So
Sandra's referring to euthanasia and the use of that in a situation when you're very sick at a certain stage, and you may make that decision, and in countries where it's legal versus where it's not legal. And so in the story and the journey, there's a conversation about that, which I think one of the fabulous things. So we're talking about monsters, and monsters are the little pieces of us, and a big piece of the story is that we all have these monsters inside of us. And one of the things you were just talking about when you're putting them all together, on the second page, you say monsters seem to feed off of stressful times. And that's so true. So you're talking about like the pandemic and families specifically. Let's just say you have a death by suicide that amps up the stress. So then you end up having additional challenges. You have additional financial hardship and depression and guilt and shame that then lead to additional monsters in this.
Yep.
And the thing that I love, so this walks through listeners, different facts about monsters that Sam discovers along his journey, these facts about monsters, and they're amazing. And you take a step back, and I love in the end, the list of all the different facts about monsters. And it was the moment, it was the second chapter in the book. And I said, okay, never mind. I'm not upset. I have to, I don't have to do anything because I do this podcast because I love it and I'm volunteer. But I wasn't, by chapter 2, I was not upset that I had to read this book. and then I couldn't put it down either. I just couldn't wait to see what happened next in the journey. And I was specifically passionate about it because one of the beauties of this podcast is our audience and our topics are so diverse that I could, in this instance, say, oh, I know someone who's struggling with this. I know someone who's struggling with this. Like, this is so perfect for this person. And this is so perfect for this person. So I know, and when you're using acronyms, YA is young adult and MG
middle grade.
Middle grade. Okay.
Yes.
So
I think that takes you from age 8 to 12. And that's it. Middle grade is just such a tough thing because there's a huge difference. And so you're usually writing within little segments of middle grade. But I can't tell people my book is a middle grade book. I do not want 8 and 9-year-olds reading my book. It's too heavy for them. But 12-year-olds, my beta readers, like to the quotes that you read at the beginning, I had a couple of 12-year-olds and a 15-year-old, and parents and teachers, and everyone who's 12 plus. Absolutely, they can cope with it.
I would think for teachers, if school systems would read it and approve it, I've repeatedly said on this podcast, there are some life skills that I think the world would be a better place if we learned a few things in middle school. And one of them are DBT skills, so dialectical behavioral therapy skills. I think those skills are freaking amazing. And if we learned them, we'd be better people. Second is I do not wish addiction on anyone. However, a lot of the principles of this 12 steps and what I see along the journey of individuals who've gone through them, amazing. And some of the principles and the understanding in this book and the acceptance of mental health and taking a step back and saying, wait, this is a normal part of being a human, and being able to identify these challenges or monsters and then work through them or push through them and not feed them with addiction or not feed them with ignoring them or any of these things. I would just love to see maybe let's just say even in 9th grade, if it was in your literature class or in a psychology class or something like that.
I'd love that too. I mean, I think the biggest thing, the big take home that I want people to know about monsters, and at least what I've learned with my life, is that they're not bad to have. Monsters are okay to have, meaning, because all monsters are our what we consider our negative emotions, right? Our fear, our anxiety, our anger, our rage. Maybe we cry too easy. Anything that makes us go, oh, I don't want to be that way. But my thing is, look, it's okay to be that way. And the more you fight it, the worse it is. Live in the moment, accept your monster, then move on. It's when you stay in that moment. It's when you let that monster keep you in this particular way. That's when it becomes problematic. And it was just so lovely. One of my friends read my book and he picked up on that. And it was just so lovely. He wrote a review and he said, he goes, it's so simple, but it's really helped me in my daily life. He goes, now I'll get mad. And instead of telling myself, oh, don't be mad, he's like, I'll be mad. And that's okay. I'll live in that moment, and I'll actually acknowledge to myself that I'm mad at the moment. And then he said, I'm able to just kind of move on a lot faster than what I used to. And it's little things like that just make me go, oh, yay. Someone was helped from these really small little ideas that I had. There's no scientific background. I didn't pick it up from any therapist. It's just how I ended up being able to cope with all the trauma that I went through. I think for me, the biggest thing was, and I still do, I cry very easily. And I used to fight it. And I used to be so mad at myself for getting teary, and I'd be really down on myself. I'd consider myself weak, all these horrible things I'd say about myself. Now I'm like, I'm getting teary. Like, I'm okay. I get teary and I just accept it. If I get teary during this conversation at any point, I no longer get embarrassed anymore. I just accept it and go, okay, I'm teary. That's okay. And I move on. And life is so much easier being that way.
It is. One of the things that I thought was really cool in the book is that when Sam started to really understand that he also had monsters, right? He begins by seeing the monsters in Ben, his brother, and he's super frustrated. He's like, seriously, Ben, you're messing up the entire family with your monster that you're dragging around all with you all over the place. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of how it starts off. And then slowly monsters start popping up. So slowly feelings and emotions pop up in everyone around Sam. And then Sam's reacting to these feelings, emotions with, guess what? His own feelings and emotions. And then he suddenly realizes, wait, my own feelings and emotions, which came out as anger. And he then realizes, and I don't like listeners, you listening to this podcast does not mean that you should not read the book, because we're just like skimming over the top. You're going to love it. But he finally realizes when he's trying to deal with people that he did not want to cry. And so he was just going to be angry. So he came out with this tragedy that happened to him, and he was just angry. And so he suddenly started telling people about his monster. The thing, what you were just saying about realizing this, that I thought was so cool, when Becky says, well, I don't want to talk right now, I have a monster, or something like that. And I thought that is what is so amazing, because it gives a voice and a language to people. And it says it is okay to say, I'm not okay, in whatever words.
Can I, for the listeners' benefit, the actual part was, I think Sam says, are you okay? And Becky says, I'm fine. My monster's not, though. He wants to be left alone. And so Sam's like, and it takes the sting away. Like it gives this arm's kind of length, because it's hard. Most people just go, I'm fine, and leave it at that. How are you? I'm fine. But it's sort of this permission now for kids or anyone to say, well, do the I'm fine, but then throw in, yeah, but my monster's not. Monster wants to be left alone. And it stings for Sam, but he's like, well, at least it's not Becky telling me to leave. It's her monster. And it just sort of gives this little cute arm's length to the whole thing. And I think it helps stop emotions, people getting hurt, because it's painful to be told, go away, I don't want to talk to you. But you've sort of this little being, this little monster in between, and it's like a little buffer.
Absolutely. Because before that, he could tell she's not making eye contact with me. She's avoiding me. The classic, what is wrong? Like, what did I say wrong? I'm going to replay everything in my head kind of banter. And when she says that, he says, oh, it's not me.
Yes, that's the other thing. Yes.
I'm going to give her space, earn her monster space. And he said, oh, okay. And he understood. That was so beautiful. So what would you say has been the most challenging part about writing a book on such a sensitive topic, with so many different sensitive topics ingrained in it, for highlighting or targeting an age group that you're targeting? What has been the most challenging piece?
Okay. Well, simple challenges is I had to be very careful with the language. But that was just something I did after the fact. I mean, in Australia, there's a lot of words, especially the F word is used very casually all the time. And so I did realize I had to do a pass and just really clean up a lot of that stuff. And that's easy. You just have Sam saying, oh, Ben dropped a lot of F-bombs. So yes, that's just sort of basic stuff. The other challenge I had was a little bit with my family, because we had a lot of silence about the suicide, and my next level with my brothers and sisters hadn't talked to my nieces and nephews about the deaths, about what had happened. Little white lies had been told instead, that my dad, Nono, had died of a heart attack. Uncle Paul had just had an accident. Uncle Martin had an accident. But there was never anything more to that. And so I'm sort of telling my family, look, I'm writing this book. It's going to be coming out. I'll be going on interviews. I'll be putting stuff out on social media. So, you might want to have a talk to the kids, because the kids aren't young anymore. Kids are all young adults. So there was no reason, not to say anything. And so that was a challenge, because I was really worried. I'm like, I need you guys to have this talk first before this book comes out. And they did. And it's like, the thing that's so crazy is we, like the first generation, we carry all the trauma, right? Because we lived it. We lived this trauma. A lot of these people, like my dad, he passed away before the nieces and nephews even met him. They never met Uncle Martin. They didn't know him. So there's this complete arm's length. It's like if you're told a relative that you never met, you're told something about them, it doesn't affect you in your heart. You just sort of go, oh, okay. And that's kind of how it was for my nieces and nephews. They they were sad, but it didn't hit them nearly as hard as what I think we all thought it would hit them, if that makes sense. And yeah, so I thought that was, I felt bad for my siblings with that, but they got through that. But I think the other thing that I don't have children, and I can understand how this happens, that if you start the lie, that's the problem. Once you start the little, or don't want to say the lie, but the little white story, then it just compounds and it compounds. And then it becomes, well, when will I tell them? You know what I mean? It just becomes this bigger thing in your head, and it just drags on for years and years and years. And that's the part that hurts the kids. That's the part. Because when I spoke to my oldest niece about it, she's like, well, it was the lie that got me the most. She said, not hearing what happened. It's like, why didn't you tell me? And so, in all fairness to my siblings, I mean, when we think about it, this happened to us years ago, right? So sort of like in the late 80s. And so you're carrying this trauma for a long time, and you have in your head that there's something wrong with us, there's something wrong with our family because our dad died by suicide. And so you've already got this barrier there. And so then when you have children, I do understand that once you've already got this barrier, it's really difficult to have the conversation. And when I did research online about it, in all fairness, it's really only been in the last 3 years or so that the conversation about suicide is on the rise, and we're trying to destigmatize suicide. Even the term committed suicide has now been changed to died by suicide. If you're on TikTok, it's unalived. The younger generation is not even saying suicide, they're saying unalived. And it's only lately that parents are given tools of, I came across this one article, but it was only written, I think, in like 2021 or 2022, about you've got to tell the truth, but always age appropriate. And so from 5 and under, if they're asking questions, this is what you say, so-and-so was very, very sick. Their mind was very, very sick and they died and it's sad. And then the next age group, you add a little bit more and you add a little bit more. But that kind of education wasn't there for my siblings when they had children. They didn't have that knowledge. And so, yeah, I know it must have been just difficult to navigate. But look, the great thing is my book's come out, the secret's out, and we can talk about it publicly now. But for a long time, all my friends knew my family history, but I never posted about it online. I never spoke about it or anything, because I knew the problem was my truth was also my family's truth and their secret. And so you walk this fine line of, when am I treading on their toes? So that was probably my biggest struggle with all of this, I'd say.
That makes complete sense. And I was looking back, episode number 8, I interviewed Janine, and she talked about living beyond mental illness and therapy burnout. And part of that episode, we talked about generational trauma. And we talked about some of the stories that get passed on from generation to generation to generation. Mm-hmm. And part of that is exactly this. My grandfather completed suicide. My mother found him in the garage. A lot of trauma then later happened to her as a consequence of that. And she was then very mental ill. A lot of my childhood trauma resulted from that. And a lot of, I think I'm a big believer in healing through honesty, much like what you said, healing through honesty at the level that is healthy for what the individual can comprehend at that stage. Because I think that's the only way that we can grow as individuals. And it also, I think, is part of what, for example, in your book, is a great way for, if this were to happen to a family member, then to be able to say or sit down, even, quite frankly, yes, I could see where it wouldn't be for a middle grade individual. However, I could see if, heaven forbid, someone were to complete suicide or die by suicide in a family, then I could see sitting next to a middle grade child and slowly reading sections of the book and talking through them, like not as a read this by yourself. But
yes, I did get that feedback of it. It would be a great tool for a parent to go step by step
yes,
through the book and
yeah, I
gauge
would.
the reaction and the questions. Yes, yes.
I think it was, I
agree.
mean, I think I would recommend that to parents that have, I highly would recommend it to parents that have young middle school and teenagers. Like, make this a family activity and work through this and read it together. And then, I don't know, why don't you sit at the dining room table and let's say, hey, what monster did you figure out about yourself today? And have that as an area of growth, because I can't
Oh,
think, right,
yeah.
of a better way to then set your children up to have healthy conversations with their partners in the future, to have healthy conversations with their children in the future, to have healthy conversations with their bosses and their coworkers, than to do this. So what a great family activity this would be for any individual.
Yeah. I've always liked the part. So of course my favorite character in the book is Cliff, our biker. I love
Oh,
Cliff, our
yes.
biker. And I do like the part where Cliff's like getting really like snappy with Sam. He's like just really frustrated. And Sam just says, "That's okay. I know it wasn't you that's mad at me. It was your monster." Like it's just I always thought that was really sweet. And I use that all the time now with myself, just mentally in my head. If someone's like a little bit having a bad day, I just go, "Oh, yeah, it's their monster." And it helps me even. I just use that little tool even for myself, which I think is fun, definitely. But yes, getting back to like the whole thing with middle school. I mean, middle school, like I said, it's got such a range. That's why I just say upper MG, because you've still got your year. Some of them will do what, year 7, 8, and 9, and some just do year 7 and 8. But I still feel that, if you're in year 8, absolutely this book's for you, because you're around 12 when you are. And in Australia, it's different. We sort of have primary school and high school. So he's going from year 6 into year 7. He's becoming high school, what we call. So, yeah, I think it's appropriate. But like I said, my pendulum has swung. I see more than what a kid probably should see when they're young. And so you sort of forget that some people have really, really sheltered lives and haven't been exposed to anything. And again, that's all relative. I was invited to a middle school here in Los Angeles to come and talk. And I said to the teacher, I said, so it was called their leadership class. And I said, what are your age ranges through here? And he said, oh, we've got as young as 10, I think he said, to 14. I went, oh. I said, my book's sort of more appropriate than my themes for 12 class. And he just looked at me and goes, Sandra, this is Los Angeles. He's like, this is Los Angeles. These kids have seen it all. And you get everything's relative, right? That, yeah. I mean, one of the reasons they actually even called me in is because there were a couple of things. One of the little boys in the class, his dad had died by suicide. But then the other thing was there were rumors going around that there was going to be a school shooting. So again, what kid should have to live through that? I never had to live through that as a kid, worry about a school shooting. And so, yeah, when you say everything's relative, these poor kids are experiencing way more.
Well, and I think that as well, when I try and think of, will continue to reiterate, especially the parents who say, I want to do everything I can within my realm of possibility to set my children up to have healthy futures. And yet I don't have a degree in psychology or anything. Using a tool like this is amazing. And I want to say, I am very involved in Georgia Tech. I'm on the board to the president of Georgia Tech. So I'll be at a board meeting at the end of the month. And I plan on talking about the book here. Georgia Tech just kicked off a well-being initiative there. And I'm interviewing the chancellor of UC Davis at the end of October. And so his interview will release, I think, in December. And we're going to talk about well-being in the college setting at UC Davis. And I would love, when you think of the challenges that we see students getting into college who don't have these skills. And a lot of them, like a lot of things we saw at Georgia Tech, for example, is when the students get into Georgia Tech, they were mostly the top of their class where they were. A lot of them had no idea how to study. They were just really, really intelligent, a lot of them. And so when I would mentor these students, I would say, here's the deal. You are the top of your class in high school, but look around you. Someone's suddenly not going to be the top of your class, and you need to figure out how to deal with that now because it's going to be a reality. And so the amount of challenges in the college scenario and the pressures that the students have now in middle school, high school, and in college. And really, I'm very proud, especially of these two universities. I know both of them are putting a huge focus on mental health and mental well-being of the students. And so, you know, just even if some of the journalism class, I mean, this also would be a great journalism book in a college setting as well, walking through this type of journey in the mental health space. So I think that part of it is phenomenal in trying to navigate those waters within it. I know a lot of individuals dealing with suicidal ideations. It's part of the challenge of having a podcast like this and having a nonprofit in the mental health space. This past weekend, I went to the Reno Air Races with a friend of mine. And on the way back, we were talking about a suicide, and he said something about someone committed suicide. And I said, you know, I don't really like that phrase. And, you know, and he's like, well, what else would you say? And I said, let me give you a couple of different options, being completed suicide or died by suicide or something like that. And so it just reminded me that some of the things in the terminology and the thought process that I'm starting to take for granted because I'm so integrated into the community and such a big advocate of it, that I'm getting that the word still needs to get out in these areas. And so I'm happy to be able to have someone say some of these topics on the podcast to be able to educate. So a lot of the listeners of this podcast include therapists. So I'm sure the therapists will be really excited to recommend your book to their clients. A lot of listeners are family members who are looking for ideas, suggestions, just resources on how to help someone who's struggling with a variety of challenges, which this is also very helpful in those realms. What would you say from your personal experience, advice that you would give to family members trying to walk through this journey?
If they've had a death by suicide in their family, well, absolutely, my first thing I would say is don't fall down the rabbit hole of thinking that there is something wrong with you and something wrong with your family and that you must just be the most unique and problematic family out there. And especially with my family, because we had 3. And it would always come up, oh, no, but we've got 3. Honestly, ever since I've started this journey and all the different events I've gone to, the amount of people I've run into that have had multiple suicides in their family is crazy. So I've learned we are not unique. We are not weird. We're not, you know, like I think that's the first thing, if you can just try not fall into that rabbit hole. The other one, clearly, obviously, if you do have young kids and they ask questions, kids are intuitive. They overhear stuff. They listen. That's what my niece did. My niece, she kind of was putting stuff together. So don't lie. There are age-appropriate ways, and you can just Google age-appropriate ways to talk to kids now, and there are resources there for you. So please don't lie. And I think the third thing would be just have a lot of grace with both yourself and your family. It's a very traumatic thing. It doesn't go away. It stays. And I think just be able to talk about it. I think that's the biggest thing. Be able to talk about it. I think one of the reasons I ended up I mean, because everyone always says, Sandra, you're so grounded. You seem so kind of well-rounded for all the stuff you've gone through. And maybe I attribute that to two things. First of all, I'm a STEM girl, physics, math, chemistry, got a science background. So I tend to be a little bit more analytical about things. I'm definitely a watcher. I'll sit back and I'll watch things. So, as a kid, I would sort of piece things together. And then as I got older, I was able to retrospectively look back on my dad and see the patterns of what was happening and go, oh, yeah, it really was there. So that, and then the fact that mum, she passed away during COVID, not from COVID, but just an angel incarnate, right? Having these 5 kids to look after, losing her husband, but I don't remember dark times, if that makes sense. If I was to look back, I remember a lot of times sitting on my bed with my mum. Probably it used to be my mum and my third oldest brother, Martin, I think, because the other kids were a bit older, so they were always sort of going out, teenagers. And we would just be laughing about stories about Dad. We'd tell these crazy stories about my dad, and we'd not be laughing at him. My dad was this crazy Italian. He was a builder, and some awful things happened to him. Like one day a house fell down on him. Just the structure was up. What do you call that when it's just the bones of the house? I can't think of it. But this horrible wind came through and fell on him. And he ended up having a really bad back, and he'd have to walk along in what they call the Canadian crutches for a little while. But, we would just talk about these funny stories of like, oh, you'd hear Dad coming down the hall, clunk, 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 and so as kids we would know, we'd have to be really quiet because clunk, clunk, Dad couldn't sneak up on us anymore. But like just these stories that we would just laugh about. And I think that just really helped me get through a lot of that childhood, what potentially would have been darkness. I just remember a lot of happiness, if that makes sense. So
that's such a special gift that she had, to be able to remember the gifts of him, the good times of him, the joys of him, and to be able to share that gift with you guys, and not have it all be ripped away by his death. I mean, that is very special.
Yeah, I thought so.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. Yeah. And I would just say the strength of you, I hope you are so proud of yourself. I'm proud of you for writing this book. I know it must have been challenging. I have said in some of the things that I've written in some of my blog posts and stuff, and some of my episodes that I've been recorded in, I've talked about, my aunt has said multiple times, like, when are you going to write your life story in a book? And many times I've said, well, I think I need to wait until my grandparents pass away. I think I need to wait until these individuals are no longer here for certain reasons. And those family stories and those family traumas. And I was just saying the other day to a friend of mine, I said, well, slowly throughout all of these podcast episodes, my story's coming out more and more. I don't think I need to wait anymore. I just want to like pieces it all together. It's all there. And there's beauty in that, because we all deserve to heal and grow and then live the absolute best life that we can live. So that is amazing. Yeah. So leading in a couple of things. First off, I want to know, is there anything you were really hoping we would cover today that we haven't mentioned yet? And then I do want to make sure I get your motivational quote.
Yes. The one thing I do want to say is that, first of all, just thank you so much, because your comment at the beginning of, why do I want to read this book? And I know that's a barrier for a lot of people. People are like, this is going to be dark and dreary. It's about mental health and everything. And it just is so, because that is a huge barrier for this book. It really is, And it's so helpful to have someone like you tell other people, no, there's a lot of heart in this, and you're going to laugh and you are going to cry, but you will not feel down at the end, And that to me is just, I just need people like you. So thank you so much for that. And then the other thing, that when you talked about the challenges writing it, I know that the thought is probably, it must have been a challenge emotionally to write it, but I'd sort of worked through a lot of my things. I really had. I hadn't gone to therapy per se, but I read a lot of books, like all of them, like just a whole bunch. Some intentionally, some because I was in leadership in a hospital. And so they sort of forced you, to go off to these leadership classes where they teach you conflict resolution and, all these things to look inside yourself and everything. And so I think that all helped. The challenge I did have was the part that I'm most proud of, and I think you picked up on it, was the mystery. Like, this is kind of a mystery book. Like, there's a big mystery that happens in all of this. And that's the part that was challenging for me, making sure that I'm laying down little Easter eggs, putting little eggs down, but not telescoping too much, and making sure that by the end, the reader's not blindsided to go, oh, no. You know what I mean? Like that whole, oh, she's just pulled a rabbit out. That, oh, no, the signs were there the entire time. That was my challenge.
You did an amazing job. I mean, I will say, and also I'm a STEM person. I'm a biomedical engineer and I run a biotech company. And so a lot of times I can read a book and I can say, okay, I get it. And yes, it happened. And this one, I was just like, wow, I was not expecting it. On page 276, I was not expecting at all what I read on page 277. And I loved that about it because it was completely unexpected. And then I was just enthralled with the fact that she managed to bring in another opportunity for another group that's struggling with some challenge to see themselves in this story. I think that is the beauty of the story, is that any individual listening to this podcast who has a challenge, you can read this book and I guarantee you there is an individual in this storyline that has the challenge that you have that you can relate to. That's how well you manage to get the diversity of the challenges in it, which I think is masterful. And Sandra, I will tell you that individuals who know me and the people listening to this podcast, they know that I don't just say things if I don't mean it. So I'm not just saying this to make you feel good, so that you know that. That's just not who I am. So well done.
The only other thing then, if you have any listeners in Orange County, I will be at the Orange County Children's Book Festival, October 1st. So
I need to make sure I announce that early on. Yes.
Yes. So I'll send you, I've got the little flyer, I'll send that to you. But if anyone wants to know more about it, you can just go to makingfriendswithmonsters.com. That takes you to my website, and I have an events page on my website.
Perfect.
Yeah. Yes.
What's your motivational quote?
The one I really like, Walt Disney talks about the way to get started is to quit talking about it and to just sit down and get started. And honestly, that is the quote for writers. It really is. It really, really is. But just for anyone, like the amount of people that will talk about wanting to do stuff, they talk about wanting to do stuff. That's the easy part. The hard part is to quit the talk and do the action part of it. So, yeah, I'm always pretty much that type of person where I get to the point where this is what I actually do. I will tell people that I want to do something, like be it a screenplay. I'm going to write a screenplay and submit it to Nichols. That's what I used to do when I used to write screenplays. I don't write them anymore. And I tell people, because then I knew that person would come to me and say, so how's your screenplay going? And I did not want to seem like a lame-o and not do it. So that was always my trick. I would always tell people things that I was going to do so that I would actually hold myself accountable and do it. So.
I'm going to use that phrase. I don't want to seem like a lame-o.
Lame-o.
That is perfect. Well, Sandra, I am so grateful for this. This has been amazing. I look forward to it. And we will make sure that we will also include in the show notes. And so send me the link and everything for that so that we can include that as well as a teaser to this episode.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you. I've forgotten her name, but your partner in crime.
Christina.
Yes, found me randomly on Facebook. I love that. And I was more than happy to contribute to your...
Yes, the auction.
Auction. Yes, the auction. That's really exciting.
Yes. So listeners, what we are doing with our book club, because we've had a lot of listeners who want the copy that has been marked up from reading that's autographed by you and by me. That is the official book club one. So we will arrange that and coordinate that with you so that we can put that for auction. All the money from the auction, everyone with RAN is 100% volunteer, including myself. Every single amount from the auctions go towards helping the individuals for the nonprofit. So we appreciate it. You just listened to episode number 15, the second in our book club series, featuring our guest, Sandra Rostirolla, author of Making Friends with Monsters. In this episode, we discussed understanding emotions through the eyes of 12-year-old Sam and his monsters. My heart exploded as I edited this episode. I love it. I truly hope that listeners will share this with their loved ones and in all areas of their community. To learn more about this book, visit www.makingfriendswithmonsters.com. As a reminder, the experiences and advice expressed in this episode are the host and guest's own personal stories and do not represent the opinions of any organization mentioned. RAN is passionate about opening the doors for all voices and experiences, not just those expressed in any particular podcast. Coffee and Conversation is proud to announce that not only are we a top 30 health podcast in Florida, but we now have listeners in 13 countries, including the US, UK, Netherlands, Denmark, Belgium, Austria, Kenya, Isles of Man, Australia, India, Canada, and our 2 new countries, Czech Republic and Ireland. I also want to give a shout out to a few listeners who've left comments on the podcast. Lynette commented on episode number 12, Why Boundaries Are So Scary. She said, "This was a great episode and helped me to understand that it's okay to set boundaries and not feel guilty about it. You don't have to say yes to everything. Self-care is saying no." Absolutely, Lynette. Thanks for sharing. Charisse commented on episode number 9, Surviving Sexual Trauma and Thriving, Maddie's story. Charisse said, "This episode is impactful on so many levels. I absolutely recommend a listen. It includes information that matters to everyone." Thanks, Charisse, for commenting on this. Finally, Katie commented on episode 8, Living Beyond Mental Illness and Therapy Burnout. Katie said, "Be raw, be real, be you. A fine credo indeed." Amen. That was Janine's motivational quote that she shared on that episode, and the episode is amazing, so check it out. If you want to share your experiences or expertise, we encourage you to be a future guest by emailing us at podcast@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org. Or if you want to share your thoughts on an episode, we'll give you a shout out here. Just leave us some feedback on an episode. You can also submit a blog post by emailing blog@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org. A little teaser, we do have a blog post coming out soon. In case you're wondering, every individual working with RAN does so on a 100% volunteer basis. As part of this, we have a special request. We are looking for a volunteer publishing assistant for the podcast. If you're interested in applying, email me at podcast@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org. Another reminder is that all funds raised go to support the mission. So don't forget to love, not like our podcast, and subscribe. I am so humbled and honored by the amazing guests we have that will be on future episodes. Believe me, you won't want to miss them. They are awesome, so subscribe. We hope you will also connect with us at www.recoveryadvocatenetwork.org, where you can donate to the mission, read blog posts, and also stay in the loop about upcoming events, including our next fundraising auction on October 26th through the 28th of this year. That auction will include the books that have been included in the book club that will have the author's signature as well as my own. And there are also a few sneak peek items that we've mentioned in previous episodes, so listen to those episodes for the sneak peeks. And today's sneak peek is that Richie Sambora and some of the members of Bon Jovi will donate a personalized guitar to a lucky auction winner. Do not miss out on this opportunity to win the amazing guitar while helping to support the mission. If you would like to donate some services, skills, or items, please contact donate@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org. I will give an extra special plea. This year is challenging for a lot of organizations because of the needs across the country, including in Hawaii, that make it difficult for organizations everywhere to be able to support the missions. So if you have time, skills, talents, anything that you can do to provide, to donate, that might help an individual to support the mission, we would greatly appreciate it. Again, that email is donate@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org. I promise you, you won't regret supporting it. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at recoveryadvocatenetwork.org and on Twitter at @RanToWellness. Now, if this episode was triggering to you, we encourage you to contact your support system, therapist, national and community support groups, the Global Crisis Text Line by texting 741-741, and/or, if in the United States, dialing 988 to reach the Suicide Crisis Lifeline. If you're in one of the other countries listed and there are specific crisis resources that are beneficial, please email us so that we can include those resources in future episodes. And you can email us at podcast@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org. Now, if you wish to provide feedback, reminder, leave comments on the episode or send us that email. Finally, thanks for joining us today, and back to your coffee.